Makefile walks in a bar and notices Dockerfile sitting alone. She joins him. They talk. They flirt. And a baby was born, and that baby was named Earthfile. We all know and love Dockerfile. It's great for building container images, and through multi-stage builds we can do much more, like, for example, run tests before an image was built. On the other hand, Makefile is old and grumpy, one that not many are still in love with, yet it is in a way the de facto standard for executing tasks. We need both types of tools, and I've been advocating for replacing Makefile with Taskfile or Justfile and combining them with Dockerfile. So we still need both types of tools, no matter whether tasks are run with Makefile or Justfile or Taskfile or anything else. Earthly recognized the need for both Dockerfile and Makefile and created a new format, Earthfile. It combines both the ability to build images and to execute tasks into a single format, very, very, very similar to Dockerfile. With it, we can do something like the following. That single command built 2 different images with 4 different tags, and it pushed those images to a registry. It signed those images and pushed signatures to the registry as well. It also created the Timoni package, pushed it to a registry, and it updated values file, and finally generated Helm package as well, pushed it to a registry and updated charts value file. If I wasn't too lazy, I could have added so much more, like, for example, execution of unit and integration tests, or anything else. We'll take a quick break for me to introduce you to daily.dev, the sponsor of this video. If you want to stay on top of everything that's happening in DevOps or with any other area of software engineering, you should definitely, absolutely, immediately try daily.dev. For DevOps, for example, I would recommend choosing the DevOps tag, but also Kubernetes, CI/CD, and automation. Finally, since AI is coming to replace us all, you might be ahead of the game with the AI tag as well. You will get personalized news feed with articles and videos based on those tags. Try it out and let me know what you think. Thank you daily.dev for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to the main subject. The best part is that if you're familiar with Dockerfile, you should be able to master Earthfile in no time, since it is very similar. On the other hand, if you're still struggling to understand Dockerfile, you should change your profession for something easier, like being a doctor or a lawyer, anything. So, I'm assuming that you did not choose the easier path, so let's dive into Earthly and Earthfile. Let's take a look at an Earthfile. The version entry specifies which Earthly specification we are using. Then there are targets like binary and image, which are similar to targets in other task executors, including Makefile. Most of the rest of that file is more or less the same as what we would normally use or do in Dockerfile. We can, for example, specify from that in Dockerfile defines the base image, but in the case of Earthfile, it can be overwritten in target. In this case, I'm using a silly demo Earthly image that contains all the tools I need. You can see it by exploring Dockerfile Earthly in the repo. It's a normal container image which, in the context of Earthfile, is used for all the tasks. However, since I don't want the images I'm producing to be bigger than necessary, I'm overwriting it in the image target with $base, which is a variable set to be the scratch image by default. Further on, we can see instructions that are the same or very similar to those in Dockerfile. We are setting a few variables with arg, but in this case, we're setting them as global so that they can be used in any of the targets. Finally, the last instruction in the general section is workdir that, as you can guess, specifies the working directory, just as you would do in Dockerfile. Now, let's move into the first target. The binary target copies files from the local file system to the container where it will be executed. Since behind the scenes, Earthly is using Docker, the typical optimization techniques apply here as well. So the first copy is copying files that are not likely to change often, while the second copy is all Go files which are likely changing all the time. That way, we can benefit from caching image layers. Further on, we are executing run instruction, which, just as in Dockerfile, executes commands. The last instruction in the binary target is save. That one is specific to Earthfile and can be used to save a file generated in a container image, either to be used in other targets or to be copied back into the local file system. The save instruction can be applied to artifacts or images. In this example, silly demo binary will be saved to be used in other targets. If we switch our attention to the Timoni target, we can see the same instruction there as well. But in that specific case, it is storing it as local, meaning that it will be copied as Timoni values queue on the local file system. So let's go back to the binary target and execute it. Targets that should be executed need to be prefixed with the plus sign so we can run it by executing earthly plus binary. You will notice that in my case, some of the layers are cached. That means that just as with Docker, Earthly did not have to execute that step, but it can use cache. If you're following along, you will not see that since it is likely the first time you're building the binary. Another interesting thing to note is that message saying that to enable pushing, we should use earthly --push. We'll see that option later. For now, what matters is that artifacts and images are not pushed to registries without us explicitly saying so. All in all, the files were copied, the binary was built, and the artifact can be used in other tasks. Let's see such a task that can use an artifact created elsewhere. On the first look, that target looks the same as what we would normally define as Dockerfile. But on a closer look, there are a few distinct differences. To begin with, we are calling the build target that, as we saw earlier, builds the binary. The objective is similar to what we would normally do with Docker multi-stage builds, except that it is now called explicitly. Then there are some arguments that serve the same purpose as in Dockerfile. One of the big differences is that we can use them for almost anything, including specifying the base image, which is set to scratch by default. Another difference is the way we copy artifacts. In case of Earthfile, we specify the target, the artifact, and where we would like to copy it. Finally, unlike Dockerfile, Earthfile allows us to push an image or any other artifact. It does that with the same instruction we already saw in the binary target. This time, however, it is not saving an artifact but two images. The registry, the image, and the tags are all defined as arguments. The important part of that example with the save instruction is the --push argument. That one indicates that the image might, and I repeat, might be pushed to the registry. I said might because, as you will see soon, we're still in control whether it will be pushed or not. So let's build an image. The important thing to note in that output is that it did not push image. We did not use the --push argument with the CLI, so it built images without pushing them. If you would like to build and push an image, we need to add the --push argument. Since this is a demo, we will also overwrite registry to use TTL-SH since it is ephemeral and does not need credentials. It simplifies things. This time, the images were pushed to the TTL registry. Now, let's turn our attention to the all target. The all target combines most of the other targets, thus allowing me to execute all the tasks at once. It is in a way more similar to what Makefile does than Dockerfile. First, we're building Scratch and Alpine images. Since the image target has base argument set to Scratch, we only need to specify the base image for Alpine. Since Earthly tends to run as many tasks in parallel as it can, we have wait that ensures that images are built before the other tasks are executed. Otherwise, cosine might start signing images before they are built. Under different circumstances, we would not need to wait for anything since Earthly would figure out the dependency tree as, for example, it knows that it needs to build the binary before it copies it to the image. But in case of cosine, there is no explicit dependency, so waiting for images to be built is a must. By the way, if you're not familiar with cosine, please watch that video over there. Another interesting thing to note is how Earthly uses arguments. In case of the cosine target, we're specifying the tag argument 4 times. As a result, Earthly will effectively execute the cosine target 4 times. That's very useful since it saves us from adding loops and similar constructs. Finally, it builds Timoni and Helm packages, pushes them to the registry, and makes changes to values stored locally. Now, if we move back to the cosine target, we can see that it has a required argument for the tag, meaning that it will fail if we do not specify the tag of the image we want to sign. More importantly, cosign needs a few secrets to be able to sign and push signatures. They're specified with --secret argument, which can be in the key value format or as only the value which becomes the key as well. Once secrets are specified, we can use them as any other environment variable. I will let you explore Timoni and Helm targets yourself and jump right into the execution of the old target. To execute the old target, we need a few additional arguments. We want to push images and artifacts, and we need to specify the secrets. From there on, we can specify the target, which is plus all, and the arguments. Before we execute that command, there is one important thing to note. The order of arguments matters. The --push and --secret and other arguments available in Earthly need to be specified before the target, and the arguments, the real arguments like tag, registry, and image that represent arg key and values must be set after the target. It is silly and confusing. I wasted a few hours trying to figure out what I did wrong, only to discover that the order matters. I understand that Earthly did that because that's how Docker expects arguments, but it's silly and bad in any case. Let's press the enter key and see the end result. That's it. That single target did everything. It compiled the binary, it created and pushed 4 images, it signed them all, it created Helm and Timoni packages. It's awesome! And we're almost done. There are only 2 things I wanted to show before we jump into pros and cons and try to figure out whether you should use Earthly. One of those is the GitHub Actions job that uses that Earthfile. If you ignore the initial code checkout and log in to GHCR, which is GitHub registry, and the steps that commit and push changes back to the repo, all the tasks are executed as a single Earthly command in the same way we would execute it locally or from anywhere else. There's not much more to it. If we want to run Earthly from CI/CD pipelines, we just need to execute the CLI. Finally, there is Earthly Cloud, which is a service that helps with caching and a few other things. Check it out. I will not show it here. The only thing left to explore is to go through pros and cons and see whether you should adopt Earthly. Earthly is an interesting project. Many have been trying to use Dockerfile as a task executor that goes beyond building container images, especially since the emergence of multi-stage builds. However, the truth is that, as far as I know, all those attempts failed simply because Dockerfile alone was not designed to do much more than to act as a specification used to build container images. Earthly changes that. It adopted Docker as the engine and combined Dockerfile with Makefile, both as formats and as functionalities those two offer when combined. The end result is more or less a familiar syntax that can build artifacts and can execute tasks. Yet, trying to make Dockerfile do what Makefile does comes at a cost and can easily result in frustration. Through a familiar syntax, one can advance fast, only to be blocked by some silly issues later. Personally, I am not sure that Earthly is good enough for me to switch away from my current favorites. I think that DevBox is still a superior way to manage Nix dependencies instead of using container images. Similarly, Task with Taskfile or Just with Justfile are better task executors than Earthly with Earthfile. On top of those, you will likely need Dockerfile that defines container images which are created by executing tasks through those tools. The advantage Earthly has is that it combines all of those. Instead of using Nix or DevBox for dependencies and tasks or Just for executing tasks and Dockerfile for specifying container images, we define everything as Earthfile. That's, in my opinion, its main strength. With that out of the way, let's go through pros and cons. CLI arguments, at least as perceived by users, must be placed in specific order. Some, like push and secret, must be placed before the target, while others, specifically those defined inside the Earthfile as arg, must be placed after the target. I understand that the reason for that lies in some being baked in arguments, while others are passed to Docker containers as arguments. However, when executing the CLI, they all look like normal or typical arguments. As a result, one can easily place an argument in a wrong place, not receive any warning, yet receive unexpected results, which might lead to hard to debug yet silly issues. Anyway, beware that order matters. You need to know what goes before and what goes after the target. Next, secrets can easily leak. Even though Earthly masks them under certain conditions, it is very easy to make an unintentional or even intentional mistake that will leak them. It's enough to have an instruction like run echo $secret and it will appear in the output. Then there are some quirks, like for example, if instruction is not working until we place it inside the busybox image. Go figure. Earthly is full of such silly issues, which leads me to conclude that it is immature. Finally, I'm not sure whether everything runs in parallel or images are saved last. In any case, not being able to control what happens very often results in having to perform some silly workarounds, like explicitly specifying that Earthly should wait for the image to be saved before, for example, trying to sign that image or those images. As for pros, well, there are two big positive reasons why Earthly is very interesting. To begin with, it uses a familiar syntax. For the most part, it is Dockerfile split into recipes like those in Makefile. If you know Dockerfile, you already know most of what you will need to write Earthfile. Assuming that most of us by now know Dockerfile, that means that the learning curve for Earthfile is almost non-existent, ignoring those frustrations. The second big one is that Earthfile combines multiple files and formats into one. Instead of specifying devbox.json or whichever other way we are using to define dependencies, and taskfile or justfile or makefile for tasks, and Dockerfile for images, we can simply define a single Earthfile. It is all in one solution and all in one format for dependencies, tasks, and image spec. All in all, Earthfile combines functionality of different tools and formats into one, and that's awesome. However, it is not necessarily better than any of them individually. And that leads me to a question. Does it make sense to switch to slightly worse solution for the sake of simplification? More often than not, the answer to that question is yes. However, I'm not sure that I am ready and willing to abandon DevBox and Just. I'll keep using those and switch maybe only a few projects to Earthly. Who knows? It might grow on me enough to consider moving away from my current favorites. Until that happens, do not take my conservative approach as a negative thing. Earthly is a very interesting project that is worth exploring further. I truly like the idea behind it. I'm just not yet willing to adopt it exclusively. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Cheers.